All right, boys, it's game day. Let's go. Let's go. Big game. Got a big game today. My package has arrived. Oh, sweet. Nice. Score! Great win, fellas. What game's next? G-men are having a great year. Let's go blue! Here we go. Prime time football. Texans, Dolphins. Let's do this. Yes! Review. Yes! Yes!
Heartland Flags. Every sport, every team, every flag.
Every team?
That's right.
Fine. I'll get a Washington flag too.
Find your flag and so much more with fast, free shipping. Heartlandflags.com. Every sport, every team, every flag. Almost.
Loyal.
Heartland Flags and Gifts presents Legends and Listeners with Scott Dochterman and Chad Leistikow. Fly 'em high and fly 'em proud. Find your flag at heartlandflags.com. Breaking down the Big Ten from the Channel Seed Studios, this is Iowa Everywhere.
Hey, Hawkeye fans, Big Ten fans, Iowans everywhere. Thank you for joining us in the Channel Seed Studios for episode 12 of Legends and Listeners here on the Iowa Everywhere Network. I am Des Moines Register sports columnist Chad Leistikow, and it is a great week to be joined by my friend Scott Dochterman of The Athletic. Scott, another dramatic week of Hawkeye football without so much as a game. Brian Ferentz officially will be let go after the season. A decision that came from university leadership and not the head coach. So, Scott, for the first time in a long time, has Kirk Ferentz not been reminded that the athletic director outranks him?
Yeah, this is the first time I've seen him checked, really, since, certainly through the Gary Barta era, he wasn't. When it came closest was the reconstituted contract and the clauses put in for the drive for 325 for Brian Ferentz back in February. But other than that, Kirk Ferentz has gotten free reign, through the course of his career. Early on, Bob Bowlesby certainly was more of a stalwart in the athletic department. But I think what we saw the other day, Chad, was a really uncomfortable Kirk Ferentz. I think one who looked humbled, maybe, just not quite himself. And we saw a different Kirk Ferentz last night on his radio show where he was kind of back to his normal routines. But I would say that was one of the more uncomfortable news conferences for us. And it was the most uncomfortable I've seen Kirk Ferentz since I've started covering this program.
Well, that's saying something, Scott. I really don't have like a hard and fast outline for the show. We'll get to some stuff, but I think we're just going to kind of, hit topics as they come to our mind regarding this because we've been talking about it now for 3 days. But As you were talking, it reminded me of a text thread I was having with a former prominent player in the Ferentz era. Okay. And I was, I'm trying to understand where he's coming from. Why the terse tone? I understand his son was fired. I get that. But why? Just trying to unpack some of this stuff. And I think this person was talking to me about how, and it totally makes sense. Ferentz and football have long valued being completely separated from Carver Hawkeye Arena, from the folks across the river. They believe they are their own entity. They've become their own entity. They've become their own kingdom almost. With Kirk Ferentz as the emperor. And this is really, he does not like when Carver gets involved, in other words. So I think that was a big part of this, that this isn't how the way I do things. And that's what I think he was just upset more than anything Tuesday, certainly about his son. I think he had to have known his son wasn't going to reach the benchmarks, right? But I just think it was more of a realization. That's why I led the show the way I did, a realization of who is in charge, and it's not him. all the time.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Because only in a handful of moments has Jessup outranked him, and that's been situations usually legal or severe controversies, Rabdo, or when, there were the rapes in 2007. Certainly a couple of years ago with the racial bias situation and investigation that you saw Kirk Ferentz kind of, take the secondary status on that. And I think this week what we saw is that now they're messing with football. They're messing with on-field stuff. And he doesn't like that. And I think the protocol of having an assistant removed before the end of the season was probably the thing that bothered him the most. Not only Brian leaving, but just the fact that this was decided before the end of the season, and we're still 6-2, and we're in tied for first place, and all of this didn't happen. However, Chad, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, is this was the best thing for the program, for the big picture, because we're a month away from the start of the transfer portal, and how many players on his current roster, even if Brian was there through the end of the bowl game and then left for the NFL, but how many players would enter the transfer portal in early December if they didn't know what was next? How many players would not come to Iowa? How many players, frankly, who are committed to Iowa as recruits would look at this and say, I don't know, man, this is rough. So the timing of it, while inconvenient, of course, for the coach and not the way he wants to handle things, may have been the best thing for the program in the big picture.
Legends and Listeners is brought to you every week by Heartland Flags and Gifts, which offers free shipping anywhere in the U.S. and always has fresh products, nearly every team, every sport, and every flag. Visit our good friends online at heartlandflags.com or in store at 3719 Southwest 9th Street in Des Moines. The timing is something a lot of people have been bringing up, and I felt like if you're going to do this, I mean, it was clear he wasn't going to reach 25 points per game. They have to average 36 plus in these next 4 just to get back on pace. And then if they do that, you assume they're going to be in the Big Ten championship game against a really good team, potentially one they scored 0 against. Mm-hmm. So you almost have to be ahead of that 25. So it just wasn't going to happen. So it's not – Beth Getz could have taken the easy road, and Barbara Wilson and the Board of Regents, and just let this play out. But you're right. The timing was intentional, and she did not, I believe I asked her about that Tuesday. Does the timing of this, is that, give you a better chance to make a good hire, to have the program be in a better spot, I guess, with recruiting and such. And she kind of deflected that a little bit, but in her statement, she did say that. So I think this was way better than waiting, because you know how it works, Scott. We saw this with Greg Davis even, after 16. It was only a few days after that Outback Bowl, but still, that's January 5th when just the departure of the offensive coordinator is announced, and then it's going to be at least a month, if not more, to get a new one in place. I'm not saying it won't be the same process, but at least, like you said, now you've got something you can sell to recruits and to keep guys on your own roster. So I'm with you there.
Yeah. Well, and you look big picture, as you said, the timetable with the NFL. The NFL season lasts longer now. It lasts till the second weekend in January. And I know that there are discussions. I'm not sure if they've been finalized, where there's the potential for coaches not to be hired until the week before the Super Bowl. So now you're stretching that into February, and you're missing the second recruiting deadline. And so, there's the potential for players to exit your program. You're not going to be able to pick up players. And then, recruits may decide that they're going to wait till the second signing day instead of sign early, or they might look around. I mean, there's just a lot of uncertainty around player acquisition, talent acquisition, based on where we are right now. And so I think in the big picture, yes, it wasn't convenient and it came at a bad time, but it wasn't like it was completely unexpected out of nowhere. Not like Paul Chryst getting fired at Wisconsin.
Right.
This one was, which may lead us into somewhere here, but
yeah, I know. Just thinking that. Yeah.
but no, I think this is something that the big picture, and it quiets the noise, because everything has been rubbed so raw around this program, from fans, from us, national media, what have you, about this offense sucks. This offense, the drive for 325, the chance for Brian, fire Brian. That now that's all gone. We know the outcome there. Now people may still be upset, but the outcome is removed. So then they can probably get on to focusing on football, rather than worrying about whether this is going to cost him his job or not, because it already has.
I have a question for you that I haven't heard anyone talk about, and I just thought of it myself. So one of the things in the Beth Getz statement was that he will not be back with us. I wonder, that does take off the table moving him to O-line coach. That was one of the theories, right? So I think Kirk would have had that opening, certainly, even into mid-January. And I think that's notable. Do you think that's notable, that now door has been closed? And because I believe, as I'm talking it out here, I think it's just the toxic nature of the whole thing from the university's perspective. They just wanted this nepotism thing to be done with.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right.
What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. If he wanted to do that, he could have already done it. It's just, to now, that's like to save his son's job when, his son failed at another job, and yes, I believe Brian is an outstanding offensive line coach and will be for somebody else if he goes down that path, or tight ends or whatever. However, then you'd have to force somebody else out of their job in order to accommodate Brian Ferentz to do that. And you're basically, the optics are that you're just moving him just to keep him on your roster because he's your son. And yes, the nepotism part of this has to play, it plays a role because it's something that's brought up daily. And everywhere we go, we're asked about that. And that's one of the topics that are brought up. When you talk to people inside Carver, that's some of the things that, wow, if he wasn't his son, there's no way he'd be here. And that spills over into other sports and other topics. And so this was the best way to remove it. But I do think, with Kirk, Tuesday, and then of course what he had to say Wednesday night, I think really you saw a different demeanor. Maybe he got over it, or at least decided to put a public face on it. Tuesday, he looked hurt. He looked humbled. Wednesday night on his radio show, which airs both on YouTube and KCRG 9.2 in the Cedar Rapids area, he was back to himself, and then came out with some, a decent statement both online, and then talked about it during the radio show, Chad, that, the Kirk Ferentz, where Tuesday we didn't know what the next step was. Now we know he's coming back.
Exactly. I did want to read just a little bit of what he said on the radio show for our listeners that didn't hear it. He said, So on Tuesday, it was the second question. I asked him, will you definitively be back given what's happened here in the last few days? And he was like, I'm just going to operate like I always have. I'm focused on this game in the last 4 games. And then John from the Gazette, I think, asked him another similar question. It was same deal, deflected. I might get hit by a truck tomorrow. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not answering the question. But something spurred him to answer the question Wednesday night, whether that's recruiting, whether that's someone told him, whether he just came to his senses. But here's what he said. I was not trying to intentionally cause celebration for some people who would love to see me go start a stamp collection or go bird watching or whatever. The intent was to try to steer this thing back to what is important right now. I enjoy coaching. Fortunately, I feel really good. The doctors tell me I'm okay. I hope they're right. See, he's throwing in this this little humor, this self-deprecating humor or whatever, and basically said later, Mary doesn't want him around anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, but that was missing on Tuesday. So I don't know what I have a theory on that. I shared a little bit with my text group, but what is your thought on why he changed so quickly in 24 hours and basically refused to tell us about his future, and all of a sudden he's opening up about his future 24 hours later?
I think his words and his demeanor, changed. And part of that is just going from day one to day two, because it was still less than 24 hours after the statement had been released on Tuesday. He knew and sometimes with press conferences, public officials have to kind of put on their battle armor. And I think in his case, he probably expected that, but he didn't look like he didn't want to have anything to do with it. He knew what was going to be asked. He knew it was going to be uncomfortable. He was already uncomfortable. He didn't want to say anything. Beth was in the room. There was just a lot of factors, I think, that made him uncomfortable and unwilling to really say anything. Like, he didn't want anything to be interpreted wrong. So he just figures, I'm just going to clam up. I'm going to give it, say, all right, we're moving on. We're on to Cincinnati, with a little more flavor. But yesterday, after a day of
I don't know why that means.
But, Wednesday, he still had another day of practice. He had another day to get used to it. He had another day to talk about it internally. He moved on. And I'm sure there had to have been conversations, whether it was with Brian or Tyler Barnes or his PR staff, the Wicksteads or whatever, that said, this is not a really good look here, because now you've got recruits going, are you going to be my coach if I come there? And then you've got, how quickly things move in the recruiting world, where other coaches hear and see that and say, aha, see, he's not going to be there. Why don't you come over here this weekend? And they could get poached very, very quickly if you leave it ambiguous. And so I think he closed that loop quickly. Then there's the ulterior, not conspiracy theory, but then the other option is, okay, I'm coming back. So if you want to get rid of me, I don't think there's any indication that that's the case. But if Beth or Barbara Wilson or the Board of Regents want to get rid of him, it's going to take a buyout, not just a retirement.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to read that quote too. He said, so until they tell me to sit down, I'll probably keep going. So I wrote this a little bit on Tuesday, and I still feel that this today is, I think he needed to almost wrestle back feel like he was wrestling back power in some way. Like, hey, I'm still holding the cards here. Took away players, wanted to be the only voice, and then didn't say anything. And then this basically said, I'm here until they kick me out, basically, which is honestly what a lot of fans wanted. They want Kirk to stay and Brian to go. So it's sort of worked out. It just was a little bit clunky and messy. My theory on it, Scott, just to finish that topic, was just he's never wanted to make anything about himself. And so I think he was probably also I don't know if he thought this through necessarily, but like the story of the press conference would have been Kirk Ferentz is coming back next year if he had said that, I think, probably, mostly. And he didn't. And so it became he didn't like how it was handled, and that, basically sending a message that don't mess with this Carver.
Yeah.
So I think in a way his messaging kind of worked, because by Wednesday night people were relieved, at least most people, not all.
Yeah, right.
Thrilled, whatever, that he's going to come back next year. So it's been an interesting tone change, and I feel like it's sort of glossed over the fact that, this is Kirk Ferentz's offense, and he's got to change. He's got to change it. So why don't we use that to launch into our final topic, since we're about 20 minutes in, which is what next, right? But first of all, I do want to remind folks that Iowa is favored by 5 with an over-under of 31 at Circa Sports. And that is our exclusive sports betting app of Iowa everywhere. Circa Sports is sports betting the way it should be, with the highest limits, lowest holds, and best odds. Download the app today at the App Store or circasports.com. All right, Scott. So what's next? Kirk Ferentz tamps down speculation about his future. What does he do next at offensive coordinator? He's not going to answer that for a while, but we can talk about it. What does he do?
There's lots of different avenues, Chad. And I mean, I think, among the challenges are he usually goes with somebody that he trusts and knows, and a lot of times has a connection with already. The thought of, pie in the sky, I've been using that phrase about Ryan Grubb. That's going to cost you a lot of money. And, that one's probably unrealistic for a lot of reasons. I mean, because then Kirk would probably feel like he was forced on him, that Kirk wants somebody who will work with him, who understands Iowa, the system. I think Brian did, of course. Ken worked that way eventually. And then Greg Davis did not work well as far as, they worked well together, but just as far as systems go, it was very clunky. I think you used a great word earlier today. And so to me, I think that means, is there anybody on staff or anybody available that would fit this role and do it well, or do it the way Kirk would want it to be done, and it would be fairly seamless? Obviously, on staff, you've got John Budmeier. That's the easiest one of all. He's already here. He's been here for 2 years. He's a senior analyst. How does he handle senior offensive analyst? How, can he just step right in, be the OC, and handle quarterbacks? He probably could. But
he can handle it, but is that what you?
Yeah.
I think there would be a lot of pushback
mm-hmm.
that his influence has been here for 2 years and they've gotten worse.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Because you look at, he's the one that was instrumental in bringing in Cade. He was the one that's instrumental in bringing in Deacon Hill. What have they done? Now, what has he been allowed to do versus what have they done? I mean, he still works with them, so, is it, if he was the one that was offered Deacon Hill first, well, right now there's some challenges there in the way he's performed. It'd be nice. But then there's, anybody else on staff? Liddell Betts comes to mind because I think he's a good mind for football. He'd be a guy that I would consider in some respects. And then there are what about this guy? And to me, that's the Paul Christ question.
Yeah, I'm with you.
He was a former coach, competed against Iowa several times, even when he was head coach at Pitt, let alone as an assistant under Brett Bielema and Barry Alvarez. Understands Iowa, understands the area, has a similar approach. They did different things, of course, at Wisconsin, and their passing game beat Iowa several times. I mean, it wasn't just the running game. So that's going to make some people go, are we really just kind of status quoing it? But if you're looking at experienced play caller, good play caller in the past, understands the style of play, will freshen up some areas that have sorely needed it. And, he failed more as a head coach than as an offensive coach, at least in this style. I don't know. I think that's probably the route I would predict at this point, but we were a long way from that, as we know.
Yeah. Let's just back up a second here. Ryan Grubb is the offensive coordinator at Washington. He has Iowa ties, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there? That's mainly the connection there, right? He doesn't have Hawkeye ties. He just has Iowa ties.
State of Iowa.
Yeah. He is making $1.45 million this year, 1.55 next year, 1.67 in 2025. So if you wanted to get someone like him, you're talking maybe $2 million-ish. That's about what Ohio State paid Jim Knowles, right? I mean, if you want to bring in somebody that was what Ohio State did, basically, what Iowa was trying to do. They're like, our defense sucks. We got to get somebody. They brought in the DC from Oklahoma State. Mm-hmm. Their defense is one of the best in the country a few years later right now. And that's how they're winning games now, which is interesting.
Right.
So that would be the Ryan Grubb strategy. And I'm all for that if Kirk is willing to do that. And I think Beth Getz would be all for that. I think that's a $2 million annual check she'd be happy to write, especially with incoming Big Ten money. And you're taking him from a Big Ten team in Washington. So, a little strategy there. So I like that. Here, I know some people would grumble at the Paul Chryst thing, but I do not. I'm with the conversation there because I listen to the Athletic Football Show. Another plug for your audience there.
Yeah,
Scott and Nate Tice is one of the guys on that show, and he's a former Wisconsin quarterback, so he's always talking about Wisconsin, and he's referenced many a time, and I'm sure you could talk to him, in your corporate meetings or whatever, how complicated and effective and like how intricate their running game was. It's not just like we've got 340-pound linemen and Jonathan Taylor. There's a lot to it. So, and he gives a lot of credit to Paul Chryst for that, for being a kind of that mastermind of that running offense. Now, you can believe it or not, but I do believe it. I mean, that's a pretty smart football guy that's talking who played quarterback for Paul Chryst. So I think you're right. I think that's one where Kirk would be comfortable. And I think that's important. I do think that's important. And especially if he said on the radio last night, I'll be here another few years, basically. I mean, who knows what that means. But you wouldn't have to sell Paul Chryst on hey, you're here, we're in this for 10 years. It could be like maybe a 3-year plan type of deal. I don't know. Yeah. Just, in theory. And you can make Bud Meyer your quarterback's coach. I would make Chryst. I'm not saying this is the number one plan, but if you do that, make him OC and wide receivers coach and just, tell Kelton Copeland to send out his resumes.
Yeah. Or, tight ends or something like that. And, you can move
Abdul, yep.
Yeah. You can move around the staff however you so choose, who knows if, Seth is a very qualified, potential defensive coordinator for, 100+ teams in my eyes. So if that was the case, then I think that would be fine. I think with Paul Chryst, the other thing that he brings is he brings enough clout and respect that where Kirk would probably leave him alone. Now, they would talk and work together.
Fair. Yeah, that's a good point.
But if it's 3rd and 2, he doesn't have to go over there and say, run the ball, that he'll trust Paul to make the right call. Now they may hash it over and talk it over and decide, and if they call a timeout or during the week or whatever, but Paul has organized good offenses before, and so I think there would be a trust element. He likes kind of two veins: either A, that they've played or worked for him, or B, somebody who's a teacher, and I think Paul could do that, and so and you could keep Bud Meyer around, and you probably need a wide receiver coach at some point or whatever, because you do want some sort of marriage there with offensive coordinator. And I think wide receiver has been, undeveloped in a lot of ways, whether that's Iowa or that's Copeland. It hasn't worked. Let's just put it that way. So to me, I think that one probably makes the most sense. He's only an analyst right now, I think, with Texas. So, it wouldn't be like waiting to the end of the year type of thing if you wanted to bring him in December. And I don't know.
That's a good point.
But I guess, is that something Kirk, do you think, would do? Is that a Kirk Ferentz move till let's say 2026? Maybe that's the year that he says kumbaya and passes on the football field. I don't mean it in life. I mean his career. We're writing his career obituary, not his life obituary.
That was just
sorry,
funny.
I didn't mean that one. Whoops.
Oh man, Scott, you threw me off there. I think it is the type of fit that he would look for. The other thing that Kirk likes to do is, he does, and I do give him credit for this. He likes to look for somebody moving a level up. So he might look for, like Northwestern did with David Braun, like an FCS. Did that with Polasek, actually. Bring someone in from a successful SCS program. I would be all for something like that if there's some innovation going on. potentially. So obviously there's, a lot of time for that conversation. But I think the real question is, would Kirk get out of the way once and for all? And I don't know if he will. I don't know if he thinks he needs to. What do you think?
I think that depends on who he hires. And that's why when I look at somebody he doesn't know, he's going to be involved because there's not a trust. It has been built over time. And it could be somebody 33, or it could be somebody like Ryan Grubb, or it could be anybody, to make sure that they do the things that he wants them to do, in the narrow and in the big picture, not necessarily the specific play calls, but just that they're doing it the way that he likes it done. And whereas, and I don't want to make Paul Chryst like the automatic number one candidate, but he kind of fits that position where Paul has been a head coach, an equal head coach at an equal institution and had a lot of success. And they've won big games. They beat Iowa several times. Whereas I don't think Kirk probably would trust him more, than anybody else, no matter if they came in, Tim Polasek would make sense on paper. He was here at Iowa. He was offensive line coach. And now he's at Wyoming and they're winning and he's the OC there, come back. But Kirk probably would have more influence than that, as opposed to, a successful former head coach.
Yeah, those are good thoughts there. Here, if he could pull that off and turn the keys over, I think that's what everyone wishes. Who watches Iowa's offense, because it's so unwatchable. I dread DVR Monday. Just trying to rewatch that game. It is. I know you rewatch the games too. It's not fun at all.
No.
At all. The Wisconsin game was a little bit fun because they succeeded a little bit running, and it was kind of fun to see what they did against stacked boxes. But anyway, my point was going to be, Kirk has always said when he retires, he wants to be like an O-line coach or something like that. Why couldn't you just get out of the offensive meetings altogether and just during practices, I know he does some of it anyway, but just like in your mind, let the offense go and just focus on your O-line, because that needs so much help right now. And you're not going to have Brian. It's just one way Kirk could maybe, ease into what he wants to do without retiring. He can still get $7 million a year and be an O-line coach.
Well, exactly. He just doesn't see himself as being a figurehead, but it's because he's been micromanaging it for so long. And I think part of that is, especially in the last two coordinators, that whether it's just not trust or there's just not been the work, they haven't worked well together. Greg Davis had a different passing offense that just didn't mesh with the outside zone and inside zone run. So he had to do things differently there. With Brian, maybe, it's pretty obvious that he sees things he doesn't necessarily like and he wants to be heavily involved with. And I think you're right. If he could dedicate himself to overseeing things, coaching the entire team, because, defense has been kind of its own entity and deservedly so. It's among the best in the country.
That works. He lets him do it and it works.
Right. You need to do the same with offense. You look at guys like Joe Paterno or Bear Bryant, even Nick Saban. They coach everybody really, really hard. They coach their coaches hard, but they get out of the way. And I think that's been the issue with Kirk over the years is he's a Hall of Fame coach, but to be considered like a generational coach, one of the great coaches in history, you've got to take a next step. And the offense has been, they've been shackled to this offense and it hasn't done anything. And so I think he needs to let go of that. Kind of, another coach I covered for a while was Dick Vermeil and the St. Louis experiment for him.
Sure.
First 2 years, he was all about being involved in running them ragged and doing all those things. By year 3, it was like, if this doesn't work, you're fired. He hires Mike Martz. He gets out of the way, drove him crazy at times, but then he got it to the big picture.
Greatest show on turf.
Exactly. Let it. And we're not going to see the greatest show on turf.
No, we're not promising that.
No, but
sorry.
Better than the worst show on turf, which is the offense.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that is the worst show on turf right now. Let's finish up with a little more Brian talk because we haven't talked too much about him, and I want to get your opinion on this. I keep asking myself, where did this go wrong? My column earlier in the week talked about, hey, this is a guy that led a team to 31 plus points or 31-ish points in 18 and 20. Great O-line track record. Coach Sheriff somehow got that 2015 line, which was had no tackles and was banged up. Had James Daniels, a true freshman out there at times, to 12-0. And then 2016, they win the Joe Moore Award for the best offensive line in the country. So quality coach, we think. I mean, not at least on the O-line, very good O-line coach. But OC, it just went downhill. And I'm curious what you think. Where did it go downhill? And one thing that I wanted to talk about was since he's become quarterback's coach, it has gone way downhill. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of it too, because we're seeing in these press conferences, it's like, why is not Joe Labus developing? Why is Deacon Hill still your best option? How is that humanly possible? And they don't have a quarterback's coach, a real one. So anyway, what are your thoughts? Where do you think it kind of went south for Brian? Because he did have success early on. Ohio State, 2018, USC in 2019, etc.
I think early on it was the combination of they had better talent than people realized, and they had a quarterback who could execute the game plan effectively for the most part. Nate Stanley was better than people notice. When you look at their offensive line that they had in 18 and 20, I mean, guys earlier on, Alaric Jackson, I think, is the most underrated offensive player I've seen at Iowa in 17 plus years. He was a dominant run blocker in his zone. He won every damn time last couple of years. Tristan Wirfs was there in 18. You had Hawkinson and Fant in 18. You had good wide receivers at times. And then in 20, you had a pretty good running back, still running, behind Alaric Jackson, who was a starting left tackle in the NFL, and Tyler Linderbaum at center. And you had a good tight end and still some good receivers too. But what happened was, what I think happened is that when the quarterback couldn't execute it, he didn't know how to channel it to let's get it to the base of what we do well and emphasize that. Because there wasn't much that they did well, but they still couldn't find that. Okay, if nothing else, let's just run this play or this type of play. And there was the one thing that has kind of bothered me over the years with the Ferentz offenses is that they don't necessarily trust their playmakers to make plays on the ball. That was with Noah Fant, Brandon Smith. They did some, but not enough, not nearly enough. Think of it in basketball terms. Get your player the ball and let them make a play. And they needed to do that more. And then, last year and this year to an extent, the injuries, last year was they didn't have any wide receivers. Their offensive line was a mess. This year the quarterback situation's a catastrophe. And he hasn't been able to figure out what to lean on. A little bit of the running game, but then everybody knew that. And then we saw last week there were wide open patches in the passing game, and he didn't exploit them. And it's like his script is really good, but his counters is never good. And I think so. It's like, what do you do to follow up in the second and third quarters? And so to me, it's always about he sees it, and then it adapts, and then he can't adapt with it.
Right. Good analysis there.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I think that's really good stuff. I mean, I think it's just sort of like almost a snowball effect of like your offense gets bad, you can't get the players, confidence starts to wane. I just think it kind of all snowballs on top of one another. And I I always tell people, like, yeah, the script is like the best chance for Iowa to score is usually early in the game because teams haven't adjusted to what they're going to do. We've seen that, and that's why I think Iowa takes the ball. That's their number one. That's their best chance to get ahead. They like to get a lead and then let the defense cook. So anyway, I don't know. I just think it's unraveled so far that there's no way it's irreparable at this point, and that's why Beth Getz had to make the move. So,
yeah, I mean, and the other part, Chad, that we know is, I mean, the fans, the critical mass of fans have had it. It's not just the angry tweet and people on Twitter getting mad at, them doing something like say 3 or 4 years ago, I just kind of rolled my eyes, if you're complaining about Nate Stanley, people, when he threw 5 touchdowns at Iowa State, I had people saying, yeah, but he missed on these ones and it should have been 8, it's like, well, that's stupid to think that way, but so, that would have been one thing, when they're averaging 31 points a game, I'm not going to get, you can just have your opinion and be quiet. But I think the regular fans now are going, I'm not coming back for this. I bought in last year. You guys got all these new players. It was the players, right? And now we see it's not. And so you'd probably see an emptier Kinnick. They wouldn't sell out every game. People want to buy in. So, and what we saw yesterday, though, I think last night and overall from people texting me and whatever, is that I think the majority of fans are still behind Kirk, though. They want Kirk to succeed. It's just they wanted Brian and they wanted different offense,
Yeah. We didn't really talk much about the Iowa Northwestern game, Scott. Let's dig into that for just a couple minutes. Deacon Hill gets the start. It doesn't sound like there's much chance of another quarterback being in there. What do you think this season goes from here? I mean, starting this Saturday.
I think it goes in a lot of different directions. We look at this matchup, and I don't have a good feel for it. I think, yes, Iowa could go in and win, and maybe even win decisively, but I also could see it losing and it really comes down to quarterback play in my eyes, because I think the defense will keep them in the game. We might see Cooper DeJean return the first punt at Wrigley Field since Gale Sayers in 1965, which I'm all for.
Great stat.
Yes, since the 6-touchdown game against the 49ers in 65. That was the last punt return. I'd love to be there for that, for nostalgic reasons and what have you. But it's going to be about quarterback making a couple of makeable plays and not turning the ball over. And the other day, Kirk was just kind of in his own head. I asked him about, what is it positive that the offense can do better? And he just reverted back to not turning over the ball. Well, and to me, I'm like, you can't just say, 0 is the goal on offense. You've got to try to figure out what. So to me, if the offense can generate 2 touchdowns on its own, and then a field goal or 2 out of that, and then whatever the defense and special teams gives you is gravy, which is more than every other defense in America. But then I think they're winners. Then I think they win, and probably win, maybe not comfortably, but they're in control. But if they can't do that, or if you subtract with a pick 6 or a fumble, near the infield or pitcher's mound or something, then I think it could be it could be down to the very end.
2 touchdowns is asking a lot. 17 of Iowa's last 29 games, Scott, they have 1 offensive touchdown or less. So 2 would be overachieving. The quarterback thing is I don't get it. I asked him about the turnover worthy plays, and we're both on the same. He doesn't give an answer that the other guys. They must turn it over more in practice, and that, I guess that's going to have to be another topic for another time. I guess I picked Iowa to win 15-13, but I don't love the pick. I really could see them lose this one.
Yeah, I'm the same way, Chad. I guess I'm gonna go 13-9, Iowa.
The under hits.
Actually, I did take. I did in a different area. I did take them with the points. Let's go 16-9.
Okay.
That way I have because I had Iowa covering, so I probably should keep that, not mix them up. But it's in 5 Big Ten games they've scored 5 offensive touchdowns this year, and that's and when you got a defense that over the last 4 games have allowed 2 combined offensive touchdowns, and that was against Purdue, and one of them was really late in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just it boggles your mind that they've gotten to this position.
What are you watching in the Big Ten this week? Obviously, we mentioned Iowa's a 4-way tie atop the West. Minnesota against Illinois, hosting Illinois, but they're only a 2-point favorite. Nebraska at Michigan State, Wisconsin at Indiana.
Yeah, I think all of those are interesting because I think that the leaders, not the legends, but the leaders of the division are a little bit better than their opponents, but not much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Wisconsin's kind of a heavier favorite, but Indiana played well against Penn State. So I'm not sure that that's I think Wisconsin's going to win, but I don't think it'll be decisive. I think Nebraska is better than Michigan State. I thought Michigan State might put up a better effort at Minneapolis last week, and it didn't happen. And then they fell apart at the end. So I think Nebraska is probably the team that carries that. Minnesota, it is interesting, though, that, as you mentioned, that what the line is being at home against Illinois, which is tied for last. And Illinois' got players, but they've been so inconsistent. But I'll tell you this, the one I really am going to watch is the rematch of the Big Ten championship game. And I want to just see if how many cameras are on the sidelines at Ann Arbor pointed towards Ryan Walters and his team. So I imagine there's going to be quite a few, right?
Yeah, what a story, man. So I know, by the way, Johnny Newton's out the first half too for Illinois, but I feel like that line is so interesting that Minnesota's only a 2-point favorite with all that.
Yeah.
Only a 2-point home favorite. That raises my eyebrows. And I looked into it. Brett Bielema, 9-0 against Minnesota as a head coach. So maybe that's why. Who knows? Last thing, Scott, is about this Michigan situation. I know we're going a touch long here. Sorry about that, Aiden. But the conference ADs, I believe, are going to be talking to Tony Petitti today. The coaches talked to him yesterday. It sounds like, I think it was Pete Thamel of ESPN. I think others have said this too, but the coaches want Petitti to do something now against Michigan while this is still being investigated. That would be an interesting precedent to set, but you kind of understand where their anger is coming from. I mean, they're like, we've lost games in their mind because they were cheating.
Well, yeah, and I completely get it. When you've got, if you know the outcome, it's third and 3, which is you could go either way, and you know which play is coming. You can set your defense accordingly, stop them, and force them to punt. Whereas if you don't know what play is coming and then they convert it, then that's how drives. That turns into points. That prevents you from scoring. All those types of things. I mean, and when you're talking about the smallest details, not the big games. I mean, like Iowa got cheated against Michigan 2 years ago in the Big Ten championship game. But let's face it, we're not going to suggest that Iowa, it might have been like 31-3 instead of 42-3, something like that instead. But overall, I think if you're Penn State or if you're Ohio State and, Maryland, I think they've been all very vocal in this situation. And same thing with, Fleck. I guess Franklin was as vocal as anybody. You've got to push because these are against the rules and they've benefited from this. And, now is this a situation? I don't know if you could take it away though, because you're penalizing the players for an opportunity to win a national title for the Big Ten Conference, which doesn't happen all that often. So, what I could see is loss of revenue. You'll lose all of your postseason revenue from this, and maybe being eligible to the Big Ten championship game next year, not the playoff, but the championship game next year.
Sure.
Not this year, but
yeah, that's a realistic. I feel like that's realistic. But the interesting thing is, Scott, Michigan's finally going to start playing teams next week. Penn State in Happy Valley, and then in the Horseshoe 2 weeks later. Or not the Horseshoe, Big House.
Yeah.
2 weeks later against Ohio State. So, you would think the signs have changed for those teams. So, but wasn't that an interesting story about how TCU knew they were stealing signs and gave them dummy signs? And look what happened to Michigan against TCU last year.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it is interesting to see when you try to rely on that. And Kirk did bring that up the other day about, sometimes you feel like you know something and then, they set a stadium record or something when he thought that they knew it. Right. I hate to know what they did know. And then that's the case. You start to think you know everything and then you don't, and then you don't execute it. That's also another part of it too. But when these games are that tight, when you're talking about a touchdown game or even a 10-point game, how you're able to stop somebody or how you're able to convert on third down could be all about knowing, hey, okay, they're going to be in, it's like half strong, like maybe half coverage, cover two, strong side, and then, pit, I'm being very, very small, but then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we got it. They're going to be cover two, which means we want to run a couple of go routes down the middle of the field or something like that. Or we want to attack because they're all not going to have on the ground because they're only going to have 7 in the box, stuff like that.
Well, you and I grew up Cubs fans, and this will be the first time I've ever been in the press box in Wrigley Field. So pretty exciting. Have you been up there before?
Yeah, I went there once. This was when Iowa played Northern Illinois at Soldier. I went to the day before Fran threw out the first pitch at Wrigley Field. So I was there for that game. I played the Giants. So I got to sit up there. That was pretty neat. Kind of a memory for me as well. Yeah,
well, looking forward to seeing you on Saturday. And thank you, Hawk fans, for joining us. See you in 2 days, Scott.
All right. Sounds good, Chad. See you there.
Until next time, Scott Dochterman. This is Scott Dochterman. This is Chad Leistikow of the Des Moines Register. We'll talk to you next Thursday at 11 a.m. from the Channel Seed Studios. Hey, maybe Noah Shannon is back on the field by then. Thanks for watching, legends and listeners, here on the Iowa Everywhere Network.